everyone. Really appreciate you giving the time, and thanks a lot for joining today. Today we have Matt joining here with us, and one of the things we're focusing on right now is some mentorship sessions. And Matt was kind enough to volunteer to interact with you all and answer all your questions. So today we're talking about utilizing open source for career advancement. That we talk about open source quite a lot, but Matt, before we get started with the agenda, do you have any would you like to first of all tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, and thanks again, everyone, for listening. Really looking forward to talking and answering your questions. So my name is Matt Van Italy. I was born in New York State in the States, and then I now live in Baltimore, Maryland, near Washington, D.C. I learned to code quite some time ago in Turtle Basic on one of the first personal computers, a Commodore 64. But then I moved professionally to the business side of technology. I've had some of the great pleasure to work with some global corporations like McKinsey, where I was a management consultant on technology, and also for software companies owned by some pretty amazing investors like SAP. I fell in love with code quality and helping developers get better at their careers by improving their craft, the craft of coding. When I just spending as much time as I did working in technology organizations, seeing how much better code quality could be, and also that most organizations didn't do a great job of helping engineers get better and learn more and be more effective. And so I started a business called Sema, and we build tools to help companies and individual coders improve code and improve their skill. And along the way, I'm really passionate about career planning and career choices, and have switched jobs, have hired hundreds of people, have reviewed thousands of resumes, have made good choices in my career, and have made bad choices. And I really like helping or doing my best to help people make the best choices they can.
Awesome, and really looking forward to learning more about you and about the topic at hand. But can you maybe talk a little bit more about Sema before we move on to the discussion today?
Sure. So our company so it's code quality tools. We just released a new product that helps make code reviews a little bit more meaningful and reusable, and helps developers build a portfolio of their work for showing off to employers, for showing off in class projects, for welcoming people to new open source projects, which is one of the reasons this is at the intersection of open source and advancing your career. It's free to individuals, free to teams, and the only requirement is GitHub. Really, this session today is about helping you in your careers, but I'll certainly work with Kunal. Anyone who wants to try it out, we'll get you a license. But today is all about you and your careers.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for sharing. And let's talk a little bit more about open source. We're getting a lot of questions at hand right now. Folks already know about it, like what is open source and stuff. But can you tell us from your perspective, what does open source mean to you and why is it important?
Sure. So open source code is code that's available in a version control system, not just GitHub, but GitHub is the most common place, that's available to anyone, the code itself. And so anyone can copy it, can make potential changes, and I say potential if you're working on the code that is the master version of the code, it has to be approved, typically by a maintainer, and you can use the code. Maybe we'll come back and talk about it, but the 30-second version, if you're using open source code, we really think you have an obligation to contribute one way or the other, even though you literally could use it anyway. We'll come back to the moral obligation, but for participating in it, you can copy it and explore it. You can become a part of a community that helps create, improve, or expand the code. Sometimes you hear folks talking about contributors and maintainers. I think about maintainers as the leadership of an open source project. They certainly set the standards and are the welcoming committee. They also do some of the code reviews, but not necessarily all of them. Whereas a contributor might suggest an issue, solve an issue, participate in code reviews. So why does this matter? First off, it's one of the coolest community projects on earth, open source. Millions of people around the world have worked together, most of whom have never met each other in person, to build code on almost any topic. NASA, the US Space Administration, has, I think, 400 open source repositories covering almost every language, and they're using it for weather and for space and all these amazing applications. Basically, if there's any topic you care about, I'll bet you. If I'm wrong, let me know, and I'll send you some swag. I bet any topic you care about, there is an open source project. So one is, it's just super cool. Second is, it's really useful. So even in commercial products that you might use, that you might buy, almost all of that code has open source in it. Major frameworks are open source, for example. I saw a statistic, about 96% of all software uses open source software as a part of it. So it's really in everything. And then third, one is it's so interesting. Second is it's really useful for the world and for other code. Third is it's really useful for individuals. And as we're about to talk about, there are many benefits for getting involved in open source to advance your career.
Yeah, and folks often think that open source always means like free. That may not be the case depending on like the licenses, and there are companies who are earning millions and millions of revenue, dollars of revenue via open source projects. So they have their own like a SaaS platform or some additional things that they offer, consulting fees or whatever. But yeah, thanks for the elaborative explanation, Matt. And you mentioned a little bit more about you mentioned about benefits of contributing. So since a lot of students are joining, let's keep it focused around that. And can you explain how it can benefit students like contributing to open source?
Absolutely, and Kunal, you shared. Kudos to you for sharing some of these, and when we were prepping for this. So all praise to you for these ideas. There are 5, I would say. They are 1, skilling up. 2nd, mentorship. 3rd, resume building. 4th, networking. And 5th, learning about yourself, self-exploration. So in terms of skilling up, by contributing, by writing code on an open source project, and by doing code reviews on an open source project, you are getting better at what you do. And when people are reviewing your code or you are reviewing someone else's code, in that moment, it's an amazing learning moment. That's one of the reasons I'm obsessed with code reviews. These can be from giants in the field, wherever they are. You can be learning from really smart people. And so it's a great way to learn more. In terms of mentorship, if you're, and it depends on the community, and we'll talk about how to find one, and it depends on how much work you do as a contributor, and we'll talk about that too. But when you do it right, you meet people who become mentors to you, whether formally or informally, not just through reviews, but getting to develop personal relationships. Third, it's a great way to help advance your resume. Some of you might be in university where there is only lecture going on for learning to code. I certainly was at a school that did that. It's really important when you're going on the job market to actually practice coding, and especially practice coding in teams. And code reviews are fundamental. Almost every organization uses them. And so to actually have real experience doing either reviewing code or more likely creating code that gets reviewed is really important. For your resume, and obviously then to get jobs. 4th, networking. So it's a little related, but as you get to know people, Some of these organizations, so sometimes open source is a totally community project. Other times, as Kunal said, there's companies built on that. Red Hat is a very famous, maybe the first truly open source company. It's now owned by IBM, and so there are jobs to be had literally working either at the companies or people who know people. I can't stress enough, the first step is to be a really good contributor. Serve first, then think, serve first, that's the most important part. And then networking comes after. In any field, people can smell a mile away that you're just trying to network. First, be useful. And then the fifth is learning about yourself. And this could be a whole other conversation about intentionally planning your career. But I think every opportunity, whether it's classes, it's an extracurricular, it's an activity like open source, every one of those moments is a chance for you to learn more about who you are and what you like and what makes you happy at work. So the fifth reason is a chance to learn about yourself. Open source projects, it's sort of like a club, but it's a club experience and an extracurricular, but it's also like a job. It just happens to be one you'll be volunteering for that will absolutely help you understand more about the kind of engineering job you want to have or don't have, or maybe even something other than a pure engineering, a pure coding job. I see folks have been asking questions about DevRel. It's a way to understand DevRel, and even not coding. Maybe it's a way to learn about something else about yourself. We could go a long ways down on how to run experiments while still in uni to understand about what you do and don't like about future jobs. But maybe I'll stop there for the 5 benefits for folks who are early in their careers to contribute to open source.
And with the last point you mentioned about exploring yourself, I think like also when it comes to like the tech stack, so oftentimes when folks are just starting out, there's so many things to do, so many roadmaps and everything. I believe like open source also is a great way to see what interests you. So if you would want to work on a big scale project in web development and mobile development or machine learning or DevOps or whatever, so it's a great way to like test out your skills as well in various domains and see what you like. So folks have asked like for an absolute beginner, what is the roadmap you might suggest to get started with open source? I just like to divide it into a few sections, and Matt, you can take over. So first of all, like skilling yourself, and you need a project, you need to find an organization, then you need to get involved with it. Matt, take it away.
Sure. And I see there was a question about creating your own open source project. The answer is you can just go to GitHub or another version control system and make the project public and then invite others. I would not recommend that until you're, number one, have other people there with you, especially if you're new to this. Perfectly fine to start it, but do it as a team and make sure you're doing it together, because you want the huge benefit of this is it's more than a solo project, it's working together. So I would not start out by creating an open source project on your own. Maybe I would start out by creating an open source project if there's a couple of you who want to build it together, you and your friends or colleagues. But most likely is I would start by joining an existing community. The first step is the first step to get started is to find a community that's a good fit. One way to do that, for sure, is ask anyone you know if they're a member of an open source community that's open to newcomers. And that's really being open to newcomers is more important than anything else about the topic. It has to be a language that you're going to be able to be useful to. So let's say language or framework, language or framework and open to newcomers. Because the first open source project you're a part of, you just want it to be a good experience, and you want to get practice at being a good contributor and a good community member. From there, you can expand into areas that you care more about or take a more of a leadership role. But the first one, you just want to learn how to be a good community member and a good contributor. So asking your friends is a good way. I'm sure, Kunal, you have suggestions of great open source communities. A shout out, obviously, to EdiHub, which is a particularly welcoming place. Is the story Goldilocks and the Three Bears? Is that only an American Europe expression, or have you heard
No,
it?
no, no. We have heard it.
Okay,
Yeah, it's pretty
so
popular here.
you think about Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You want to find the just right community to get started. You're almost certainly using giant frameworks that Facebook has created and made open source. You don't want to start with that. It's too big. You want to make sure you're contributing usefully, and it's all about being of service. And for early tenure folks, it's somewhere that big is unlikely for you to be helpful. Similarly, too small. If you go to a project where there's no code reviews going on, or no commits, or very few, or there's one person as the moderator, maintainer, not always, but usually just one, it's probably not the right place. Not the right place. Instead, you want one that's just right in the middle. I think that was Mama Bear. So once you have an idea of one you might care about, what you should just do is watch for at least a week. Turn on notifications, see what pull requests are happening, see what issues are created, see how people are talking to each other. I would really just watch, and definitely I would read all of the documentation. In part to understand if the documentation, like if you don't understand it, it's probably a sign that it's not aimed for someone at your level. Also, they may not be great at welcoming new people if the documentation doesn't make sense. So that's one reason. The other reason is if you end up joining that and being an active member of that community, there's nothing more annoying to a maintainer than people asking questions that are answered in the documentation. And the opposite is true too. If you read the documentation and, for example, compliment the maintainer for writing it, because open source maintainers get a lot of grief and they don't get enough compliments. So thanking them for good documentation is a great way to get started. Obviously, it has to be genuine. You have to believe it. But I always get started by reading the documentation and watching first before trying to help. And then the first one was trying to pick a good community. Maybe if you're literally about to try this, maybe pick 2 or 3 and watch them all for a week and decide which one feels the most right. Before you start volunteering yourself.
Thanks for sharing, Matt. And yeah, it's definitely like there's no one path to open source. You may find a project that your friend may be working on, for example. Um, so yeah, I mean we can talk more about that, and I think like you can definitely check out the explore page on GitHub as well. Find open source project there. Why I recommend this is because you can like filter out projects according to languages, or you can also check out like summer of code with google.com. There you can check out it's a program like encouraging students to contribute to open source. So there you can find organizations that are listed, right? But yeah, I mean actively just getting involved in communities. We can talk more about this when we answer the questions, and I'm listing down all the questions, so keep them coming. Cool. Let's move forward, and thanks for sharing, Matt. But can you maybe talk to us a little bit more about how we can make the most out of it as someone who is just getting started? So this is the question that I wrote because folks, we have a question over here, for example, uh, any guideline or roadmap for folks who are already active in open source. So as of me, I have a good set of personal projects, and someone is saying, and good contributions in some CNCF projects. How do I sort of get myself out there and also reach out to companies active in this space?
Sure. So let's talk first about being a contributor, where you are, giving back to one or more open source projects, and then we'll talk about maybe the second part of connecting with companies. As a contributor, let me 5 suggestions. Number 1, focus, and I'll repeat them obviously. Focus. Number 2, be considerate. Number 3, be useful. Number 4, small pull requests if you're coding. And number 5, remember that it's not just about coding in ways to be helpful. So I'll say a little bit more. First is focus. It is way better for your learning, for your resume, for everything, if you do a smaller number of things well than a large number of things not well. That is true, I think, in all areas of career planning and growth, but it's particularly true in open source. So Unless you have a lot of time, I would, after you explore a couple repositories, open source communities, pick one and give all of your time to that, rather than doing two or three as a participant. You can watch a couple, sure, but I would really do an awesome job helping on one before you start trying to help on two. Yes, I get overwhelmed seriously. It's true. So a small number of things really, really well. That's exactly right. Second, being kind and thoughtful. So these community, the folks who are the maintainers, some of them are paid, some of them are not. They should be treated with incredible respect and appreciation, because they are doing something for you. They are doing something for the world. So I like to say, don't write anything to a maintainer that you wouldn't mind your mom overhearing or saying it directly to your mom. Again, I think it's advice broadly, and we can forget because we're all in these different places. But I suspect you would not say to your mom, probably, why haven't you finished dinner yet, if mom is the one doing cooking? And there's people who ask open source maintainers, why haven't you finished making my suggestion yet? Don't talk like that to them. It's a quick way to burn trust, and it's just not the right way to behave. So be kind. Third is being useful. So there's nothing more frustrating, or there's few things more frustrating to an open source community than just doing work for work's sake. An example, commenting on an already closed pull request is super annoying because it just gives the maintainer one more notification and it doesn't do any real work. So again, imagine telling the maintainer, hey, you know what I just did? I commented on an open pull request, on a closed pull request. I did that because there's not really a reason, right? Because you want to have an activity dot on GitHub. It's super not worth it. Super not worth it. Just if you can't be useful, be silent until you can find a way to be useful. If number 4, small pull requests, also true in general, not just open source, but it's true here. If you are making changes to the code, make them small enough in discrete pull requests to make it easy for the reviewer to review. My rule of thumb is and some of you might be new to this, but just try to I'll say my rule of thumb first. A good outcome is the code, the reviewer only having to make a couple, 1, 2, 3, 4 comments on that section on your pull request. If he or she or they is making more than 4 comments, it's likely that the pull request was too large. So watch the comments back to you, and if it's more than 4, try to make it smaller. One reason is, probably the main reason is it's empathetic for the reviewer, because it means you only have to focus on, the reviewer only has to focus on one thing. The bigger it is, the more mental energy it takes, which also means the slower it might get released. And so you want to make it really, I would say, bite-sized pieces for a reviewer. It's true on the other side, too. If you've ever had to review a large pull request, you know how it just takes a lot more mental energy. And then the 5th point is it's not just about being a member of an open source community and helping. It's not just about the code, although if you're looking for engineering jobs, definitely you want to find a way to contribute code. But there are other ways, too, like answering questions. The maintainers are so busy that seeing other people asking questions and sending them to the documentation of where those questions are answered, or just answering them, probably do both to encourage them to look at it too, takes a weight off of the maintainer's shoulders. Some communities need help translating from one language to another of documentation, for example. That has nothing to do with coding. But because this is about advancing your career, it really would be great to find a way to contribute where you can code, at least as the most important thing.
Thanks for sharing, Matt. I could not agree more about the larger PR's point of view. It also brings up a thought in my mind about communication best practices, because folks who are mostly contributing to open source are also like volunteering, and sometimes it may be possible that your PR is open for months and months. So you just have to be patient around that. And one of the best ways to speed up that process is making it easy for the reviewer, and you can definitely reduce the size and break it down into smaller PRs, individual PRs. and stuff. Awesome.
Finding companies that do open source. One question might be how do so one question might be how do I is it a good strategy to go try to find a job by contributing to an open source community at an organization that has open source code to try to go work at that, let's say Red Hat, IBM? It might, but first and foremost, you want to be a good open source contributor. So almost certainly, I would not start at one of those because you want to get your feet settled. You want to know what does it mean to be a great contributor. I would learn some lessons first on an organization other than that. When you are ready to make that step, it's a great idea because it's basically like having an internship without working there, and you don't even have an approval process. You can just show up and start again, be a really good contributor, so that they and just work first before trying to inquire about a job. I will take a note to go look for lists of companies that are open source based. Many companies contribute to open source. We'll work together to put together a list to that. Again, it could be a really cool way because you're not talking to a recruiter. There's not tens of thousands of people applying. You're just going to start working there, so to speak. You're going to work on the project. But I can't stress enough. When you're going to do that, you need to put your best foot forward. Hey Kunal, I'm Matt. I'm a university student. I'm such a huge fan of what the product does, and I love JavaScript. I watched the community for a week. I saw that there was a need to start answering questions. So I just started answering them based on the FAQs that this has put out. Then in my fourth week, once I got the hang of it, then I started taking issues. And I asked a person for feedback on my pull requests. And the first time I did it, he said it was way too big, so I broke it up for the next time. And I'm really pleased to say that now I have 20 successful PRs 6 months later, and I'm just a huge fan of your company. I'd love to meet you. Could we talk for a few minutes? Right? Literally, and right, Prabhat's right. So the biggest tech companies have it too, but there's even smaller ones, and some of them you haven't even, you may not have heard of yet. You probably can't get, you certainly can't get a job at a place like Google skipping the interviewing process by doing open source, but you might be able to do it at smaller mid-sized companies. And so I definitely would wait. I would not be contributing to FANG projects until you are sure you are a great contributor. If you're thinking about trying to get a job at a place like that, because the bar is so high. If you're going to contribute there, you need to be really awesome. So I don't think it's a good strategy for FANG. I do think it's a good strategy for a job search in general. And a huge part of your first job out of uni is finding a place where you get good feedback and you grow. And by, I call it an internship, so to speak. By contributing to an open source project, you will definitely know how they treat engineers. And so you get a lot more information for free. I mean, you're not getting paid for that, at least to start, but man, you're learning about if that's a place you'd want to work.
Awesome. I loved your last point that you mentioned about big tech companies. I've had experience with this because it's also like contributing to those projects is relatively like difficult because they may not show much interest to like newcomers. So I contribute for example, contributing to Facebook open source is relatively difficult. They are like very strict guidelines and stuff. But what Matt mentioned was actually absolutely spot on. Getting a role by skipping the usual stuff and like getting it from your open source contributions, you have to be really good for big tech companies. I know a few people who got hired at like Google and Facebook just via their open source contributions. So I believe it's possible, but you have to be really good, and your projects have to be like significant. But yeah, speaking of smaller companies, it definitely is a great way to contribute and showcase your skills as well. So yeah, definitely check it out. Cool. Let's talk a little bit more about being a maintainer and how does one transition from being a contributor to a maintainer, Matt?
Sure. So, like in so many areas in life, with respect to, let's say, promotions, advancement, the best way to get an advancement is to do the job in advance. And that's definitely true in the open source world. So once you've figured out how to be a great contributor, and for all the ways that we said, start watching what maintainers do and do more of that. Definitely take on more and more pull requests. Definitely, definitely add. Definitely take on more pull requests. Definitely answer people's questions, which could include this answer. This is answered in our FAQ. You can find it here. You don't have to literally give everyone a one-to-one answer because part of this is encouraging people to find it for themselves. Once you've done pull requests and you see that your comments, the first time you do it, I would definitely get some feedback from a maintainer, official maintainer, to make sure that you're doing it the right way and to see if they have feedback on your pull requests, because it's also can be frustrating if the pull requests, if your reviews aren't as useful, aren't as useful. So definitely you want to get some feedback. Maybe ask someone else to review the pull requests with you. Then, after you've spent some time doing reviewing pull requests, welcoming people to the community, answering questions, then would be a good time to go and ask one of the official maintainers, I'd like to sign myself up for becoming an official maintainer of this group. Some tips on that: you absolutely, positively must meet your time commitments. Kunal, I'm such a fan of Community Classroom. What you've built is amazing. What I can do is like 15 to 20 minutes of answering Discord questions 5 to 7 days a week. Not every day, but pretty much every day. And I will do at least 2 hours of sessions every month. If I say that to Kunal, which is true by the way, I absolutely must meet that. If I beat that, great. But Kunal and open source maintainers, as an example, are trying to figure out this, making this work with all of these volunteers and all these different parts. You must be reliable, and it would be much better to under promise and over deliver. Hey, I can do 5 pull requests, review 5 pull requests a week. Say that and deliver 7, than it is to say that you are delivering. Say that you're going to do 10 and deliver 7. Someone needs to count on you, especially when they can't look you in the eye and see, and see. So meeting your commitments is hugely important, absolutely hugely important. As a maintainer, I would also spend some careful attention on the documentation, because documentation can never be good enough to help to make it easier for new people. Joining, so documentation is a part of it, and also being kind back. Kindness is important in everything, but assume your mom's listening. If someone asks you a question, that's the number one question in the README. Thank you so much. Here we answer. I really recommend that you go to FAQs, and you can find it right here. And here's the link. It takes almost no more time to be polite, and not only is that person watching, but everybody else is too.
Thanks for sharing, Matt. And also, giving and receiving feedback is very, very important for maintainers. Most of the time, when we spend reviewing code than writing one, in most cases that I have seen. But yeah, it's you need to have the best of both worlds when it comes to being a maintainer. Cool. Awesome. And let's now answer some questions. So I have written down, the questions we got in Discord right now in the sheet. Cool. Let's get started with it. And there are some questions related to tech stack. See, it depends on the project. There's no one best tech stack to contribute to open source. It's up to what your interests are. As Matt mentioned previously, that there's an open source community for basically everything you work with. Matt, would you like to maybe just touch upon that to answer this question?
Yeah. Early in your career, you just want to get good at something or several things. So if you're working on a language already and you like it, just keep going with it, and get as deep as you can in language or framework number one. There is one of the things you're learning to do is learning how to learn, and it is you will learn a lot more going deep in language X than light in languages X and Y and Z. So if you like the language you're working on, that you've already started learning, definitely work on a project that involves that. If you don't, to be honest, Kunal, you can override me. I'd rather you work your first project. I'd rather you pick the language you are best at, because your first project should be all about learning to be a good contributor. And the more subject and the more language knowledge you have, the more useful you can be. If you know Java and you want to get into JavaScript, I would first practice being a contributor in Java, and then use Java, and then use another. Then once you get good at being a contributor, then you can start looking at Java, JavaScript as an example.
Yeah, I believe that I agree with your point, and I believe like one more important thing to keep in mind is you have to have an open mind, because when it comes to open source projects, it might be possible that so for example, we have a question here. So I've seen most web dev tech stack also requires something else, like more than that. So that is true. You may learn about like CI/CD tools, how projects are deployed, how releases are created. So tools for these particular things, obviously, like something extra would be required from what you already know. That's a nice thing, because you have an open mind to learn and explore, so you'll be learning new skills while contributing. One thing I also recommend as a student, like try out new things. So if you're trying out new things, try out contributing to newer open source projects. It's not like you have spent the past all your time in just one single project and you're not learning anything new. You're only stuck on, let's say, React. Is fine, like having an expertise is okay, but if you're exploring and trying out new things, because the question I get is so many things to do, how do you know which one am I going to be good at? So try it out. Contribute to open source will definitely help you, but yeah, have an open mind is what I wanted to check in. Cool. We answered the one being in maintainer, and a lot of questions about working remotely. So can we maybe talk a little bit more about how we can learn in public and getting remote rules? And I mean, you work with folks remotely, Matt. How has your experience been like, and how do you hire, and what do you look for from an open source point of view?
Sure. So I'm going to answer two different questions, but both related. So learning in public, what is it? Why does it matter? I actually didn't really understand it till I started contributing a few months ago. So you can learn from my lack of knowledge. Learning in public means, with very, very, very few exceptions in the open source world, ask your question on a channel or to a group or in a public place. Don't send a private message. One reason is the person you're sending the private message to is so freaking busy that he, she, they may not be able to answer, especially if you're sending it to a maintainer, and especially if you don't know that person, that you're giving them one more thing to do, and if you ask them a private question, it adds to their work. Whereas if you add it to a general place, a more common place, someone else can jump in and answer it. By the way, that other person can feel useful, because especially if you're a new contributor, but you can answer a question from somebody else, it feels great. You might be thinking, oh, but that's a stupid question, I'm afraid of looking foolish. What I would say to you is, if you go to an open source community and you ask a question in public and they treat you poorly, you should quit. You should quit. You're a volunteer, and there are plenty of places who are very happy to get help and treat people respectfully. And if you're asking, maybe the last thing, if you're asking it, if you are asking it, then you should, then other people are almost certainly going to be asking it too. I really wanted to ask people individual questions first. I really didn't understand. I think, Kunal, I wrote you privately when I first met you, so I have it wrong. Now I understand. Ask it in public, and if they treat you poorly, you know how they'll be, and you can go find somewhere else. Second question is about remote work, and then third is about looking for remote work. So Kunal's exactly right. At our company, Sema, we have about 45 people who work in about 25 countries, including 4 now in India. Excuse me. I'm in the United States. There's fewer than 10% of our employees are in the United States. And what has happened is, of course, you all know about COVID, but what it was happened with multinational companies is that maybe they were doing work remote or work from anywhere kind of stuff before COVID, but COVID required them to teach how people could work remotely for everyone, no exceptions. And as a result, they realized it was much more possible to have a globally distributed team. Because if you're not going to be going into the office, it doesn't matter if you live a mile from a person or you live. How far apart do we live, Kunal? 20,000 miles? 10,000? I'm not good at geography. I think 10,000 miles. Very far. I'll look it up. The distance between.
7 oceans.
7 oceans, exactly. So what that means is even in a 20-year increase in outsourced technology services, and so that would be it would fall in this category if you're not going to work for the company, but you're going to work through an intermediary. Or it also includes freelancers. There is a lot more opportunity, especially in engineering, for working with a team that may be based somewhere else. Our engineers are in Africa, Europe, North America, South America, and Asia. We don't have any in Antarctica at the moment, but maybe someday. It's harder from the organization side to do it right, and some people are better at remote than others. As for getting a job, so let's go to part 3. So we at Sema, we only hire one of 2 ways. One is through referrals from people who already work here and who can vouch for someone they've already previously worked with. Or we go through contractor and freelancer agencies. One famous example is TopTal, which is TOPTAL, which is really more for mid or senior level participants, workforce participants. We have very good things to say about a company called Velotio, VELOTIO, from whom our colleagues in India work. Definitely read all of the things on their website to make sure you are suitable. If they say we don't hire folks straight from uni, I don't know if it's true or not, but definitely follow those rules for applying to be in their talent pool or being a full-time employee. I really like these freelancer sites. Well, you guys are early on. I would not do a freelancer site because you need mentorship and training. So I would look for companies that are hiring, especially if they're going to put you on projects. Let's say you work for a consultancy for a couple years. By the way, you can also be doing open source when you're at a company, and so getting to know other places you might want to go work. You want to work at a place that's really going to mentor you at an early stage. Early stage, get that right, and then you can use some of these tips as you're a stronger engineer to go to network, as possible way to network into other organizations through open source and otherwise.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Matt. And I love your point about what you mentioned about remote work. There are a lot of companies that hire globally. So remote work is like 2 types. One is like within the country and one is like globally. So yeah, there are companies that hire globally via other companies like remote.com and stuff. So highly recommend you all to check that out. And there's a question related to understanding the code base. Yeah, you don't have to understand the entire code base in order to contribute. You can learn on the go while contributing. And it also doesn't really matter if you're from an electronics branch or you're doing arts or commerce. I think it's open to all. No one is you don't even have to have a degree to contribute to open source. So don't worry about that. Cool. All right. Matt, there's an interesting question and we're just going to wrap it up real quick. We have 2-3 questions more to go. And the one question is, you mentioned you can do open source while you are working, right? So the question is, how would one balance that, right? So for example, the learning part and balancing your internship and job with open source and stuff. Yeah.
So yes. So, and again, we could do a real long session on this as well. Some general career advice. do a very small number of things very, very, very well. One reason is employers like to see a track record of success, and the smaller number of things you do really well, the smaller number of things you do, the more likely you are to do any one of those really well. A second is you're going to learn more by getting deeply involved with a small number of things. And the third thing is the fewer number of things, the more likely you are to do a really good job, and the more likely you are to get good references, formally or otherwise, from the people you're working with. For folks on this call who are still in school, it absolutely starts with doing really well on your grades. Absolutely, positively. If you do not have a great grade point average, I really mean this. Sit yourself down, write up on a piece of paper or type it up. What are honestly the reasons I don't have a better grade point average? And what honestly could I do to make that grade point average better? If you're working on the hardest degree at your uni and you're literally giving everything you can and you're going to have an okay grade at point average at a really hard major, that's okay. But in any other situation, it's almost certain that you're going to be able to, by focusing more and taking it more seriously, get better grades. It is never too late to do that, even if your grade point average has been so far, because if you've done so grades your first 3 years and then a great job on your fourth year, then employers can see and you can tell truthfully, I didn't really know what I was doing my first 3 years, but then I really got it together, and look what I can do when I've gotten it together. So grades always first. Similarly, when you're in a job, doing an awesome job at your job, always first. You should be having check-ins with your manager. You don't have to be super annoying about it, but at least once a month, even if they don't have a feedback session, tell me, how am I doing? Are there things I could do a better job on? How can I be a better employee? And just awesomely maximizing that, trying to get you to be helpful and successful in the eyes of your manager, just like successful in the eyes of your university. Those are the most important things. Second tier is internship. If you already have an internship, do the best possible job you have in it, because you want a reference from it when you're done, and it's the right thing to do because you've made that commitment. Then we're on to other things. And now you have to be honest. How much time are you honestly willing to give to work on other things relative to other ways you might spend your time? And pick carefully. I'll give you an example. I am the founder and CEO of a software company. There are 168 hours in the week. A good way you know if someone's really busy, if they keep track of that. I sleep for about 7 hours a day. I don't give up sleep. I spend some time with my children. I get a little bit of exercise, and then I work about 90 hours a week. 90. Including things like being of service to communities. So maybe I do 5 hours of volunteering and then 85 hours of work. I do not have time to contribute to an open source project beyond the volunteering that I do, because I would not do a good enough job on top of my time commitments. So you have to be honest about it before you sign up for it, because it is actually worse. It's honestly worse if you have a resume full of contributor. Yeah, what did you do? Well, I was there and I made one comment. That's not nearly as good as just having an internship where you've nailed it, done a really good job, or an open source project where you really are contributing. Realistically, I would aim for 50 hours, 50. If you don't think you can do 50 hours over 6 months, I probably wouldn't do it. That's 2.5 hours a week, if I did that right. 2.5 hours a week. So that's actually, could be reasonable, could be not. But if you're not ready to do at least 50 hours once you find the community you like, doesn't mean the first one, because they may not be good. I would not, if you don't have time to do that, I wouldn't sign up to help just yet. As I promised Kunal, I'm very passionate about career planning. Oh, I'm very passionate.
No. I agree, and so I do a lot of things, and this is when I have realized the importance of saying no to a few things. Right? You have to make sure you're not burning out and prioritizing your tasks and your future goals.
What looks good? Kinds of contributions look good. The contributions that look the best are one, where you have learned, two, where you have worked hard, three, where your colleagues would say you have done a good job, and preferably four, where you made a difference, where something was better as a result. And so, if you spend 50 hours on a project, an open source project, over those 50 hours, you should be able to learn something about not just being a contributor, but also about that code base and getting better at coding. Helpful, you're going to behave in the right way that your colleagues think you were useful. You learn something that you could talk about, and then fourth, hopefully the project then does something as a result. That's actually less important, especially in open source. But you can say, I worked on this, and over, in April we had 5,000 star, got another 1,000 stars, or 5,000 people started using it, or whatever. That actually matters less early in your career than your contribution. So every job matters, and I do not mean to be this disrespectfully, but I would rather, just to give you an extreme example, I would rather you be a contributor or even a maintainer on a small open source project than I would rather you sweep the floors than to be a custodial, someone doing custodial services at Facebook. Facebook is wildly more successful than any other thing you might do, but nobody cares about that at the early stages. This is about you doing something, learning, working hard, and what you do makes a contribution that relates to engineering.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing, Matt. And yeah, we answered all the questions and we are right about time as well. So we're going to wrap this one up and do a lot more. And this will be recorded and shared with you all later on. Matt is also, I believe, going to write up something. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, Matt, any closing remarks?
It's wonderful. As I said, I made a commitment to Kunal that some 2 hours a month of sessions like this. So at your disposal on career planning, resume building, giving and receiving feedback, obviously code reviews too, but anything about advancing careers, I'm so passionate about it. And Kunal, I'm just really looking forward to being more of service.
Amazing. Looking forward to it, Matt. And thanks everyone for joining, giving your time. Keep up the good.